An elderly couple seeking shelter from a desert storm broke through a cracked wall in room 6 of an abandoned motel and discovered $310 million in cash that would expose a 50-year-old secret and change their lives forever. Before we dive into this incredible true story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The Arizona sun had already climbed past brutal by the time Willa reached across the center console and turned down the radio. Her husband Thornton had both hands on the wheel, knuckles pale against the faded leather, eyes locked on the endless stretch of highway that shimmered like water in the distance. They had been driving for 4 hours straight, and the air conditioning in their 2008 Honda Civic had given up somewhere outside Flagstaff. The windows were cracked, letting in air that felt like it came straight from an oven. Willa was 72 years old, silver hair pulled back in a loose bun, reading glasses perched on her nose even though she wasn't reading anything. She had that look people get when they're thinking too hard about something they can't change. Beside her, Thornton, 74, wore his usual uniform, button-up short-sleeve shirt tucked into khaki pants, a brown belt with a brass buckle he'd had since 1983, and work boots that had seen better decades. His face was weathered, the kind that comes from 35 years of delivering mail in every kind of weather the Midwest could throw at a man. They were on their way to California. Their granddaughter Emily was graduating from college, the first in their family to finish a 4-year degree, and nothing short of death was going to keep them from that ceremony. They had saved for 8 months just to afford the gas, the cheap motel rooms along the way, and maybe a celebratory dinner. Social Security didn't stretch far, especially when prescription costs kept climbing. Willa adjusted the visor against the glare and glanced at the GPS mounted to the dashboard with a suction cup that had seen better days. The little blue line showed they were still 3 hours from the California border, cutting through the emptiest part of Arizona, the part where towns were 50 miles apart and gas stations were prayers you hoped got answered. Thornton cleared his throat, the way he always did before saying something he thought might worry her. "We should probably stop soon. Tank's getting low." Willa checked the gauge, just under a quarter tank. "How far to the next town?" 23 miles, he said. "Should be fine." Should be. Willa didn't like the sound of should be, but she didn't say anything. They had been married for 51 years, and she had learned which battles to pick. This wasn't one of them. She leaned her head against the window and watched the desert blur past. Endless scrub brush, red rock formations that looked like giants had gotten bored and walked away mid-sculpture, and skies so blue it almost hurt to look at. The first sign of trouble came as a smudge on the horizon. Thornton noticed it first, squinting through the windshield. "What is that?" Willa sat up straighter. "Looks like smoke." "Too wide," Thornton muttered. "And it's moving." Within minutes, the smudge had grown into a wall, a massive, churning wall of dust and sand rolling across the desert like something alive, something angry. The sky above it had gone from blue to a sickly yellow-brown, and the temperature seemed to drop even though the sun was still beating down. "That's a sandstorm," Willa said, voice tight. "A big one." Thornton's jaw clenched. "We need to get off the road." "Where?" Willa looked around frantically. There was nothing. Just highway and desert and that wall of dust getting closer by the second. "Thornton, where?" He pressed the gas pedal down, the old Civic shuddering as it tried to go faster. 70 miles per hour, 75, 80. The car wasn't built for speed, and it protested with every rattling panel and grinding gear. Willa gripped the door handle, eyes locked on the storm. It was close enough now that she could see it roiling, turning over itself like a wave about to break. "There!" Thornton pointed ahead. "Sign!" Willa saw it, a faded green road sign, the kind that's been beaten by sun and sand for so long the letters were barely visible. It read Exit 37, services 1 mile. but there was no indication of what services or if they still existed. Thornton took the exit without slowing down, tires squealing as they hit the off-ramp. The road turned to cracked asphalt, then gravel, then something that might have been a road once, but was now mostly dirt and regret. The Civic bounced and groaned, and Willa braced herself against the dashboard. "Thornton, slow down. You'll break the axle." "If that storm catches us out here, axle won't matter." The wind hit them first, a gust so strong it shoved the car sideways, and Thornton had to fight the wheel to keep them straight. Then came the sand, millions of tiny bullets peppering the car, the sound like radio static turned up to 11. Visibility dropped to almost nothing in seconds. Thornton leaned forward, nose almost touching the windshield, trying to see anything through the brown haze. "I can't see the road," he shouted over the howling wind. "Just keep going straight. There has to be something." And then, like a miracle or a mirage, shapes emerged from the storm. Buildings, low, rectangular, arranged in a horseshoe pattern, a faded sign swinging violently on rusted chains, Desert Palms Motel. The letters were barely visible, the paint peeled away by decades of sun and sand. Several of the bulbs that once lit up the sign at night hung broken, dangling by wires. Thornton turned the wheel, and the Civic lurched into what used to be a parking lot. The pavement was cracked, weeds pushing through everywhere, and an empty pool sat in the center of the horseshoe. Its blue paint faded to gray, filled with tumbleweeds and debris. The motel itself was 2 stories, maybe 20 rooms total, every window either boarded up or broken. The doors were weathered wood, some hanging open, some missing entirely. "This place is abandoned," Willa said, stating the obvious because sometimes the obvious needs to be stated. "It's shelter," Thornton shot back, already unbuckling his seatbelt. "Grab your bag. We need to get inside now." The moment they opened the car doors, the wind tried to rip them off. Sand blasted their faces, getting in their eyes, their mouths, their noses. Willa pulled her jacket over her head and ran, Thornton's hand gripping her elbow, guiding her. They stumbled across the broken parking lot, past the empty pool, toward the nearest building. The first door they tried was locked. The second was open, but the room beyond was completely destroyed. The ceiling caved in, glass everywhere. The third door, room 6, was closed, but not locked. Thornton pushed it open, and they fell inside, slamming the door behind them against the wind. Silence, or at least, the muffled version of silence. Outside, the storm raged, sand hitting the walls like waves against a ship. But inside room 6, the air was still, dusty, stale, but still. Willa leaned against the door, breathing hard, sand falling from her hair and clothes. Thornton stood in the middle of the room, hands on his knees, coughing. They stayed like that for a full minute, just breathing, just grateful to be out of the storm. Finally, Willa straightened up and looked around. The room was surprisingly intact. A queen-size bed sat against the far wall, its floral bedspread faded but not torn. 2 nightstands flanked it, lamps still on them, though the bulbs were surely dead. A small table and 2 chairs sat near the window, which was boarded up with plywood. A bathroom door stood open to the left, revealing a small sink, toilet, and shower stall. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, like snow that had settled and never melted. "Well," Thornton said, brushing sand from his hair, "it's not the Ritz." Willa almost laughed. Almost. "How long do you think the storm will last?" Thornton walked to the boarded window and pressed his ear against the plywood. The wind howled and shrieked. "Could be hours. Could be all night." "All night?" Willa looked at the bed, at the dust, at the closed door. "We can't stay here all night." "We can't go back out there either," Thornton said gently. He walked over and took her hands. They were shaking. "We're okay. We're safe. We'll wait it out, then we'll go." Willa nodded, but she didn't look convinced. She had that feeling, The one she used to get when she was teaching and a student was about to do something they'd regret. That prickle at the back of her neck that said, "Pay attention, something isn't right." Thornton, ever practical, was already inspecting the room. He tested the light switch. Nothing. Tried the faucet in the bathroom. Dry. Checked the door lock. It worked surprisingly well for something that looked so old. He even bounced on the bed a few times, sending up clouds of dust that made them both cough. "Mattress is decent," he announced. "Springs are good." "We are not sleeping on that," Willa said firmly. "Might not have a choice." Willa sighed and set her purse down on the table. She pulled out her phone. No signal. Of course no signal. They were in the middle of nowhere in an abandoned motel during a sandstorm. She looked at Thornton. "Your phone?" He checked, shook his head. "Nothing." Great. They spent the next hour trying to make the room habitable. Willa found an old towel in the bathroom that seemed relatively clean and used it to wipe down the table and chairs. Thornton used his handkerchief to clean the bed as best he could, then pulled back the bedspread to check the sheets underneath. Surprisingly, they looked okay. Old, yellowed, but no visible stains or tears. "Whoever abandoned this place left in a hurry," he observed. "Beds still made, towels still in the bathroom, even found soap, though I wouldn't use it." Willa had noticed the same thing. The room felt preserved, like whoever had been here last had simply walked out and never come back. There was something unsettling about it, something that made her skin crawl. She tried to shake the feeling off. They were just tired, stressed, worried about the storm. That was all. As the afternoon wore into evening, the storm showed no signs of letting up. The light coming through cracks in the boarded window turned from yellow to orange to deep red, then faded entirely. Darkness came quickly in the desert, and with no electricity, room 6 became a cave. Thornton had a small flashlight in his pocket, the kind that clips to a keychain. He set it on the nightstand, angled so it provided at least some illumination. Willa pulled out the granola bars and bottle of water they had packed for the drive. It wasn't much, but it was something. They sat on the edge of the bed, sharing the granola bars in silence, listening to the storm. The wind had developed a rhythm now, building to a howl, dropping to a moan, building again. Sand continued to pelt the walls in waves. Somewhere in the motel, a door was banging open and shut, the sound echoing through the empty courtyard. "Do you remember the first trip we ever took?" Thornton asked suddenly. Willa smiled. "Wisconsin Dells, 1972. You wore that yellow dress. And you wore that awful Hawaiian shirt." "Hey, that shirt was cool." "That shirt was hideous," Willa laughed. "But you looked so happy in it, I never told you." 51 years, Thornton said softly, "and you're still keeping secrets." "Small ones," Willa said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Only small ones." They sat like that for a while, the storm raging outside, memories keeping them warm inside. They talked about other trips, other storms they'd weathered together, literally and figuratively. The time their first car broke down in a snowstorm in Nebraska, the hurricane that took the roof off their house in Indiana, the recession that nearly took everything else. They had survived it all, together. Around 9 o'clock, exhaustion finally won. They lay down on top of the covers, fully clothed, shoes still on, ready to run if they needed to. Thornton kept the flashlight on, neither of them willing to face complete darkness in this strange place. Willa closed her eyes but didn't sleep. Couldn't sleep. Her mind was too active, running through worst-case scenarios. What if the storm damaged their car? What if they ran out of gas trying to get to the next town? What if they missed Emily's graduation? Beside her, Thornton's breathing had steadied. She could tell he was drifting off. He had always been able to sleep anywhere, a skill he'd developed during his 2 years in the army back in the late 60s. Willa envied that ability. Her mind never stopped, never rested, always churning through problems and solutions and problems with the solutions. That's when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm, a dull thud, rhythmic, coming from inside the room. She opened her eyes and listened. There it was again. Thud, pause, thud, pause, thud. "Thornton!" she whispered. No response. "Thornton!" She jabbed him with her elbow. He jerked awake. "What? What's wrong?" "Listen." They both went still. The wind howled outside. The door banged somewhere in the courtyard, and underneath it all, that sound. Thud, pause, thud, pause, thud. "You hear that?" Willa asked. Thornton sat up slowly. "Yeah, what is it?" "I don't know. It's coming from—" She looked around the room, trying to pinpoint the source. "The wall, behind the bed." Thornton grabbed the flashlight and stood up. He walked around to the head of the bed and pressed his ear against the wall. Willa watched his expression change from curious to confused to concerned. "It's definitely coming from in there," he said. "Sounds like something knocking." "Knocking? Like a person?" "No, not like a person, more like, I don't know, like something loose, maybe pipes. In an abandoned motel with no running water." Thornton frowned. He knocked on the wall with his knuckles. The sound that came back was hollow, too hollow. He moved a few feet to the left and knocked again. Solid. Moved back to the spot behind the bed. Hollow. "That's weird," he muttered. "What's weird?" "This section of wall. It sounds different, like there's a gap behind it." Willa got up and joined him. He was right. The wall behind the bed sounded hollow, but the walls on either side were solid. She ran her fingers along the paneling, looking for seams or cracks. The wood was old, warped in places, covered in decades of dust and grime. "Maybe it's just how they built it," she suggested. "Old motels probably cut corners." "Maybe," Thornton said, but he didn't sound convinced. He kept tapping different spots, mapping the hollow area. It was roughly 6 feet wide and seemed to run from floor to ceiling. That's a pretty big gap for a construction shortcut. The thumping sound came again. Thud. Pause. Thud. Louder now, or maybe they were just paying more attention. "Could be something caught in there," Thornton said. "Animal, maybe. Or debris shifting." "In a sealed wall?" "I don't know, Willa. I'm a retired mailman, not Bob Vila." Despite everything, Willa smiled. Thornton had a way of diffusing tension with practical absurdity. It was one of the things she loved about him. He was never dramatic, never panicked, just approached problems with the same methodical patience he'd used to sort mail for 3.5 decades. "Should we—" Willa hesitated. "Should we look?" "Look how?" "I saw a toolbox in the maintenance closet near the office, or what used to be the office. Had a crowbar in it." Thornton stared at her. "You want to break into a wall?" "I want to know what's making that sound." "Willa, we're squatting in an abandoned motel during a sandstorm. I don't think we should also add vandalism to the list." "Who's going to know? Who's going to care? This place has been empty for years." Thornton looked at the wall, then at his wife, then back at the wall. The sound came again. Thud. Pause. Thud. It was starting to get under his skin, that sound, like a heartbeat that shouldn't be beating. "Okay," he said finally, "but we wait until morning. Better light, and we'll know if the storm has passed." Willa nodded. That was fair, that was reasonable. But as she lay back down on the bed, as the thumping continued its irregular rhythm through the night, she knew sleep wouldn't come easy. Because that sound wasn't random. It had pattern. It had purpose. And somewhere in the back of her mind, in that place where teachers develop instincts about things being wrong, a voice whispered that whatever was behind that wall had been waiting a very long time to be found. The storm raged on. The door banged in the courtyard, and behind the headboard of room 6 in the Desert Palms Motel, something knocked and knocked and knocked. By dawn, the storm had finally exhausted itself. The wind died down to nothing, and the sand settled like ash after a fire. Weak sunlight filtered through cracks in the boarded window, painting thin lines of gold across the dusty floor. Willa had slept maybe 2 hours total, her dreams fragmented and strange, full of walls that moved and sounds that followed her. Thornton was already awake, standing by the window with his ear pressed to the plywood. "I think it's clear," he said. "We should check the car." They opened the door carefully, half expecting another wall of sand to come rushing in, but the morning was calm. Eerily calm. The parking lot looked like a different planet, everything covered in a fine layer of beige dust. Their Civic was barely recognizable, completely buried on one side, sand piled against it like a snowdrift. "Jesus," Thornton breathed. It took them 20 minutes to dig out enough sand to open the doors. Thornton tried the ignition. The engine turned over once, twice, then died. He tried again. Nothing. He popped the hood and spent 15 minutes checking wires, cleaning connections, checking the air filter that was completely clogged with sand. "We're not going anywhere," he finally announced. "Battery's dead, probably from trying to fight that wind yesterday. And even if I could jump it, we'd need to clear this sand, and I'm not sure the engine would run right with all this dust in the system." Willa looked around at the empty desert, the abandoned motel, the endless stretch of nothing in every direction. "So what do we do?" "Walk to town, I guess. Hope someone has jumper cables and a tow truck." "How far is town?" Thornton pulled out the map from the glove box. It was old-fashioned paper, creased and worn. He traced their route with his finger. "Looks like maybe 15-20 miles back to the main highway, then another 10 to the nearest town." 25 miles, Willa said flatly. "In this heat, at our age." "You have a better idea?" She didn't. But as she looked back at room 6, at that door standing open, she thought about the wall, about the sound, about the hollow space that didn't make sense. "Give me 1 hour," she said. "For what?" "I want to check that wall." Thornton started to protest, then stopped. He saw the look in her eyes, the same look she used to get when one of her students was struggling with a problem and she wouldn't rest until she'd helped them solve it. Determination mixed with stubbornness, mixed with something that couldn't be argued with. 1 hour, he agreed. Then we walk. They went back to room 6. In the daylight, filtered though it was, the room looked even sadder. The dust was thick enough to write in. Water stains marked the ceiling. The carpet near the bathroom was definitely growing mold. But the wall behind the bed that still looked strange. That still sounded hollow when Thornton knocked on it. Willa found the maintenance closet where she'd seen the toolbox. It was a small room off what used to be the motel office, filled with old cleaning supplies, broken mops, and a red metal toolbox covered in rust. Inside, she found a crowbar, a hammer, some screwdrivers, and a flashlight that surprisingly still worked when she flicked the switch. Back in room 6, Thornton had moved the bed away from the wall. Without furniture in front of it, the hollow section was more obvious. The paneling looked newer than the rest of the wall, or at least different. The grain didn't match, the color was slightly off. "Someone patched this," Thornton said, running his hand along the seam. "And not that long ago. This wood isn't as old as the rest." "How long ago?" "I don't know. 10 years, 15, but definitely after this place closed down." Willa handed him the crowbar. "Then let's see what they were patching." Thornton hesitated one more time, the crowbar heavy in his hands. Then he shrugged, positioned the flat end under the edge of the panel, and pulled. The wood groaned. Nails squeaked. With a crack that sounded too loud in the empty room, the panel came free. Behind it was darkness and the smell. Musty, dry, old. The smell of air that hadn't moved in years. Thornton stepped back, and Willa shone the flashlight into the gap. At first, she couldn't process what she was seeing. Her brain tried to make sense of the shapes, tried to find a rational explanation. But there wasn't one. Because stacked inside the wall cavity, packed tightly from floor to ceiling, were bundles. Dozens of bundles, maybe hundreds, each wrapped in plastic, each roughly the same size and shape. With shaking hands, Willa reached in and pulled one out. It was heavy, heavier than it looked. She set it on the floor and they both stared at it. Through the yellowed plastic, they could see green. Lots of green, rectangular green, with faces on it. Thornton knelt down slowly, his knees cracking. He picked at the plastic with his thumbnail until he found a seam. He pulled, the plastic tore, and there it was, undeniable, impossible, terrifying. Cash. Stacks and stacks of $100 bills, bound with paper bands, packed tight, real. Willa sat down hard on the bed. Thornton just stared. Somewhere outside, a bird called. The sun climbed higher, and in room 6 of the Desert Palms Motel, 2 elderly people on a fixed income sat looking at more money than they had ever seen in their entire lives combined, and they had no idea that they had just opened something that would change everything. Not just for them, but for dozens of families they had never met, in a story that started 47 years ago and wasn't finished yet, not by a long shot. For a full minute, neither of them moved. They just sat there, staring at the bundle of cash on the floor like it might suddenly sprout legs and run away. The plastic was yellowed with age, brittle around the edges, but the money inside looked pristine, crisp, clean, like it had been printed yesterday and sealed away for safekeeping. Thornton was the first to reach for it. His hands trembled as he picked up the stack, turned it over, examined it from every angle. The bills were hundreds, all of them. He counted the first stack silently, lips moving. $10,000. One small stack was $10,000. "Willa," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "there's more." She stood up on shaky legs and looked into the wall cavity again. He was right. There were so many more bundles. She could see them stacked neatly, row after row, disappearing into the darkness. She reached in and pulled out another bundle, then another, then another. They kept coming. Soon the floor of room 6 was covered with plastic-wrapped packages, 20 bundles, 30, 40. Willa lost count. Her heart was hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like them. They were retired teachers and postal workers. They drove a 2008 Civic and clipped coupons and bought generic brand everything. They weren't the kind of people who found hidden treasure. Thornton sat down on the floor, surrounded by money, and started opening the bundles one by one. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely tear the plastic. Inside each bundle were neat stacks of $100 bills, bound with paper strips that had faded but were still readable. Each strip was stamped with an amount, $10,000, $10,000, $10,000. "These bills," he said, holding one up to the light. "They're old. Look at the serial numbers. These are from the 70s, maybe early 80s. Willa knelt beside him and took the bill he was holding. He was right. The design was older, the colors slightly different from modern bills, and the serial number sequence suggested these had been printed decades ago. She checked another bill, then another, all sequential, all from the same print run. "Someone didn't just hide this money," she said slowly. "They organized it, catalogued it. This isn't some random stash. This is systematic." Thornton stood up and shone the flashlight deeper into the wall cavity. "There's something else back here." Willa's stomach twisted. "What kind of something else?" "Looks like a box, metal. Give me a second." He reached in carefully, arm disappearing up to the shoulder. She heard scraping, grunting, then he slowly pulled out a grey metal box, the kind that might have held important documents or valuables. It was locked with a simple combination lock, the kind with 3 rotating number wheels. "Should we open it?" Willa asked, even though she already knew the answer. Thornton tried the lock. It didn't budge. He tried a few random combinations. Nothing. Then, almost as an afterthought, he tried 000. The lock clicked open. "Who uses 000?" Willa muttered. "Someone who either wanted it found or didn't think it needed much protecting," Thornton replied. He lifted the lid slowly. Inside were papers, lots of papers, photographs, ledgers, envelopes, newspaper clippings yellowed with age. Willa's hands shook as she reached in and pulled out the first item, a photograph. It showed a man, maybe 50 years old, standing in front of the Desert Palms Motel sign when it was new and bright. The man was smiling, one hand on his hip, the other gesturing toward the motel like a proud father showing off his child. Written on the back in faded ink, Earl Whitmore, owner, 1962. "Earl Whitmore," Willa read aloud. "He must have owned this place." Thornton pulled out another photograph. This one showed Earl again, but he wasn't smiling anymore. He was standing with 3 other men, all wearing suits despite what looked like desert heat. The men had the kind of faces you don't forget, hard, angular, eyes that looked right through the camera. They were standing near the empty pool, the same pool that now sat filled with tumbleweeds outside. The photo was dated on the back, 1978. More photographs followed. Earl with different men. Earl signing papers. Earl looking progressively more worried in each successive photo, the smile gone, replaced by something that looked like fear. The final photo showed him alone, much thinner, standing in front of room 6. His eyes were hollow. The date on the back, 1979. Willa set the photos aside and reached for a ledger. It was the kind accountants used to use before computers, with columns for dates, descriptions, and amounts. She opened it to the first page and started reading. The entries went back to 1976. Deposits, withdrawals, transfers, but the amounts were staggering. $50,000 here, $200,000 there, $500,000. The description column used names, but they were clearly codes: Redbird, Falcon, Eagle, Hawk. Beside each code name was a real name, but those had been partially redacted, black marker obscuring last names and details. "This is a record," Willa said, her voice shaking. "Someone was tracking money, a lot of money." Thornton picked up another ledger. This one went from 1977 to 1978. The amounts got bigger, the entries more frequent, and about halfway through, a new section started. This one was titled in careful handwriting, "Pension Fund Disbursements." "Pension Fund," Thornton read. "Whose pension fund?" Willa found a newspaper clipping tucked between pages. The paper was brittle, the ink faded but still readable. The headline made her blood run cold. "Silver Mesa casino workers lose millions in pension scandal. Executives missing." The article was dated October 1978. It detailed how workers at the Silver Mesa casino in Nevada had discovered their pension fund had been systematically drained over several years. $37 million gone. The casino executives responsible had disappeared. Federal investigators suspected the money had been laundered through various businesses across the Southwest. The workers, most of them dealers, waitresses, cleaning staff, people who had worked their entire lives for that pension, were left with nothing. Willa's hands went numb. She looked at the bundles of cash scattered across the floor, then back at the newspaper clipping. $37 million. She looked at Thornton. His face had gone pale. "Count them," she whispered. "Count the bundles." They spent the next hour doing exactly that. They pulled every single bundle from the wall cavity. They stacked them in rows of 10. They counted and recounted. When they were done, they sat on the bed staring at the result. 216 bundles, each bundle containing $10,000. That was $2,160,000 visible on the floor. But the newspaper said $37 million had been stolen, which meant this was just a fraction. Either there was more hidden elsewhere, or this was someone's share. Thornton went back to the wall cavity with the flashlight. He reached in as far as he could, feeling around. "There's more back here, deeper. I can feel more bundles." They pulled out another wave, then another. By the time they finished, the entire floor of room 6 was covered. They couldn't even walk without stepping over money. Willa started crying. She couldn't help it. The enormity of it was too much. Thornton sat beside her on the bed and put his arm around her shoulders. "How much?" she asked. "Total. How much?" Thornton looked at his notes. He had been keeping count on the back of an old envelope. "If my math is right, somewhere around $310 million. $310 million, Willa repeated. The number didn't even sound real. "That's not possible." "It's sitting right in front of us." But the newspaper said 37 million was stolen. Thornton picked up the ledger again and flipped through it more carefully. Near the back, he found something they had missed. A page with a different title. Total Assets Secured, August 1978. Beneath it, a list of locations, offshore accounts, shell companies, property holdings, and at the bottom, a total $312,823,490. Jesus, Thornton breathed. The 37 million was just the pension fund, but whoever did this, they stole from multiple sources. This was bigger than one casino. This was organized crime-level stuff. Willa felt sick. They weren't just looking at lost money. They were looking at destroyed lives. Families who lost everything. People who worked their whole lives and ended up with nothing because someone got greedy. She thought about her own pension, the one she and Thornton lived on. It wasn't much, barely $1,800 a month between both of them, but it was theirs. They had earned it. She couldn't imagine someone just taking it. "We have to call the police," she said. "And tell them what? That we broke into a wall in an abandoned motel and found $300 million? Thornton shook his head. "Willa, they're going to think we stole it." "We didn't steal it." "You think they'll believe that? Two broke retirees suddenly in possession of a fortune? They'll arrest us first and ask questions later." Willa knew he was right. She had watched enough true crime shows to know how this looked. They had means, they had opportunity, and they definitely had motive. Their financial situation was public record. Anyone could look up that they were barely getting by. Finding this money would make them instant suspects. "Then what do we do?" she asked. Thornton stood up and started pacing, stepping carefully around the bundles of cash. "We document everything. We take pictures. We read every single paper in that box. We figure out who these people were and what happened. Then we take all that evidence and we go to the authorities with a complete story." "That could take hours. Then we better get started." They began with the metal box. Willa pulled out every single item and laid them on the bed in some kind of order. Photographs in one pile, ledgers in another, newspaper clippings in a third, random documents in a fourth. There was a lot. Years' worth of records. Someone had been incredibly thorough. The story that emerged was both fascinating and horrifying. Earl Whitmore had owned the Desert Palms Motel since 1962. It had been a decent business through the 60s, catering to travelers on their way to California. But by the mid-70s, the interstate highway had been rerouted and traffic dried up. Earl was facing bankruptcy. That's when the men in suits showed up. According to notes Earl had written on the back of some photographs, they were representatives of what he called the organization. They offered him a deal. They would use his motel for meetings, for storage, for various business purposes. In exchange, they would pay him extremely well and keep his business afloat. Earl took the deal. He didn't ask questions. He didn't want to know details. But over time he started noticing things. The men who came and went at strange hours, the locked rooms he wasn't allowed to enter, the packages that arrived and departed without explanation, and the money. So much money. By 1978, Earl had figured out he was involved in something criminal. The notes suggested he had discovered the pension fund scandal, had realized the money being laundered through his motel was stolen from working people. He was horrified. But he was also trapped. These weren't the kind of people you just walked away from. So Earl did something desperate. He started skimming. Small amounts at first, then larger. He was building his own insurance policy. If they ever came after him, he would have evidence. He would have leverage. He carefully documented everything, every transaction, every name, every meeting. And he started hiding portions of the cash. The final document in the box was a letter, written in shaky handwriting on Desert Palms Motel stationery, dated March 1979. Willa read it aloud, her voice breaking in places. To whoever finds this, my name is Earl Whitmore. If you are reading this, then I am probably dead. I have made terrible mistakes. I got involved with people I should have run from. I helped them steal from good people, working people, people who deserved better. I cannot undo what has been done, but I can try to make it right. The money hidden in this room represents a portion of what was stolen from the Silver Mesa Casino Workers' Pension Fund and other sources. I have kept detailed records of everything. Names, dates, amounts, locations. It is all in this box. The men who did this are powerful. They have connections in law enforcement, in government, in banks. I tried to go to the authorities. They found out. Now I am in hiding, but I know they will find me eventually. So I am leaving this for someone honest, someone brave, someone who will do what I could not. Please give this money back to the families who lost everything. Use the records to bring these men to justice. I know it is a lot to ask of a stranger, but you are my last hope. You are their last hope. I am sorry I was not stronger. I am sorry I was not better. But maybe you can be. The workers who lost their pensions, their names are in the ledger. Most of them are probably still alive, or their families are. They deserve this money. They earned it. It was stolen from them. Please, make it right. Signed, Earl Whitmore. Silence filled the room. Willa set the letter down gently, tears streaming down her face. Thornton wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. They sat there surrounded by $300 million, understanding now that it wasn't a treasure. It was a burden. It was stolen lives, stolen futures, stolen dreams. Those poor people, Willa whispered. 47 years. They've been without their pensions for 47 years. Thornton picked up the ledger that listed the pension fund contributors. There were names, addresses from 1978. Some had notes beside them. Retired 1981, died 1985. Moved to Oregon. Small human details that made them real. Some of them are probably gone, he said quietly. But some might still be alive, and their children, their grandchildren, all of them affected by this. Willa thought about their own children, their daughter Sophia, who was still paying off student loans at 43, their son Marcus, who had declared bankruptcy after medical bills from his wife's cancer treatment, their youngest Jamie, who worked 3 jobs just to afford a 1-bedroom apartment. What would their lives have been like with just a little more security, a little more help? And these families, the ones who had lost everything, what had their lives been like? How many marriages had ended under financial stress? How many kids couldn't go to college? How many dreams died because someone got greedy? We can't keep this, Willa said firmly. Thornton looked at her. I know. Not a single dollar. I know. Even though we need it. Even though it would solve every problem we have. I know, Willa. I know. He reached over and took her hand. We're going to do the right thing. She squeezed his hand tight. People are going to think we're crazy. Probably. We could pay off Sophia's loans, get Marcus back on his feet, help Jamie buy a house. We could, Thornton agreed. But we'd know where it came from. We'd know whose money it really was, and I don't think either of us could live with that. Willa nodded. He was right. She had spent 40 years teaching children about honesty, integrity, doing the right thing even when it was hard. How could she look her grandchildren in the eye if she kept stolen money? How could she live with herself? But God, it was tempting. Sitting there in that motel room, surrounded by more money than they would earn in 10 lifetimes, it was so tempting. They could disappear. Take the money and vanish. Change their names. Start over somewhere far away. No one would ever know. Except they would know. And that would be enough. We need to document this properly, Thornton said, switching back to practical mode. It was his way of handling overwhelming emotions. Focus on the task. Focus on what needed to be done. Do you have your phone? Willa pulled it out. Still no signal, but the camera worked. They spent the next 2 hours photographing everything. Every bundle of cash, every page of the ledgers, every photograph, every document, every newspaper clipping. Thornton arranged things carefully, made sure the dates and details were visible. Willa took hundreds of photos, making sure they had backup evidence of everything. They also started a written inventory. Thornton found a notepad in the glove box of their car and began listing everything methodically. Bundle count, denominations, dates on the bills, serial number ranges. He worked like he was inventorying packages at the post office, systematic and thorough. By early afternoon, they were exhausted. They had been working for hours without food or water, running on adrenaline and shock. Willa's hands were cramping from holding the camera. Thornton's knees ached from kneeling on the hard floor, but they were almost done. The final count was staggering. $310,200,000, give or take. Some of the bills were damaged, some of the bundles were short, a few bills, but that was the approximate total. More money than most people would see in 100 lifetimes, sitting on the floor of an abandoned motel room in the middle of the Arizona desert. What happens now? Willa asked. Thornton looked at his notes, looked at the photographs on Willa's phone, looked at the mountain of evidence they had collected. Now we figure out who to trust with this. The police? Which police? Local, state, federal? Earl's letter said these criminals had connections everywhere. We need to be smart about this. Willa thought about it. She had taught enough students over the years to know that good people existed everywhere, but so did corrupt ones. Earl had tried to do the right thing and it had gotten him killed. Probably. They never found a death certificate or obituary, but the implication was clear. The FBI, she said, federal crimes, interstate. This is their jurisdiction. And they'll believe 2 random old people who just happened to find a fortune. Not if we just tell them, but if we show them everything. The ledgers, the newspaper clippings, Earl's letter, the systematic organization of the evidence. They'll see this isn't something we staged. Thornton nodded slowly. We'll need a lawyer, someone to protect us legally. Make sure we don't accidentally incriminate ourselves. We can't afford a lawyer. We can't afford not to have one. Willa pulled out her phone again and stared at the screen. Still no signal. They would have to drive somewhere, find a phone, make calls. But first, they needed to secure the money. They couldn't just leave it lying around, and they couldn't take it with them. $300 million didn't exactly fit in a Civic's trunk. They spent another hour carefully putting all the bundles back into the wall cavity. It felt wrong, hiding it again. But it was safer there than anywhere else. They took the metal box with them, though. The documents were evidence, the most important evidence. They needed to protect those. Thornton used the crowbar to carefully nail the panel back in place. It wasn't perfect, but it would do. Anyone who looked closely would see it had been disturbed, but casual observers wouldn't notice. They pushed the bed back against the wall, arranged the room to look like they had simply stayed overnight during the storm. Willa gathered their belongings. Thornton did one final check of the room, making sure they hadn't left anything obvious behind. Then they stood in the doorway and looked back at room 6 one last time. Our lives just changed, Willa said quietly. Yeah, Thornton agreed. They really did. They walked back to their car. The sand had dried in the heat, and Thornton was able to dig out enough to open the doors. He tried the engine again. This time, miraculously, it turned over. Coughed, sputtered, but ran. The battery had apparently gotten just enough charge from sitting in the hot sun. "Where to?" Willa asked as they pulled out of the Desert Palms Motel parking lot. "Nearest town with a phone," Thornton said. "We make some calls, we find a lawyer, and then we figure out how to give $300 million back to people who've been waiting 47 years for justice." As they drove away, Willa looked back at the motel in the side mirror. It sat there in the desert, baking in the afternoon sun, looking exactly like what it was, an abandoned ruin that time forgot. But she knew better now. It wasn't forgotten. It was a tomb, a memorial, a testament to one man's guilt and his desperate attempt to make things right. And now that burden was theirs. Two elderly people on a fixed income, driving a beat-up Civic, carrying evidence that could destroy powerful people and restore stolen lives. They had no idea what they were getting into, no idea how hard the road ahead would be, no idea that their simple act of honesty was about to shake the foundations of corruption that had stood for nearly half a century. But they knew one thing. They knew that some things mattered more than money, more than comfort, more than safety. Things like integrity, like justice, like being able to look yourself in the mirror and know you did the right thing, even when the wrong thing would have been so much easier. The desert stretched out before them, shimmering in the heat. Somewhere ahead was their granddaughter's graduation. Somewhere behind was $310 million and a secret that had waited 47 years to be told. And between them was a choice they had already made, though the world didn't know it yet. They were going to give it all away, every single dollar. Because that's what heroes do. Not the kind with capes and superpowers, but the kind with calloused hands and social security checks and hearts that still remember what it means to be good. The road stretched out before them, endless and uncertain. But for the first time in years, Willa and Thornton didn't feel poor. They felt rich in ways money could never measure, and they drove toward whatever came next, together, the way they had always done everything, the way they would face everything that was about to come, together. The nearest town with a working phone turned out to be 32 miles east, a place called Copper Ridge, population 673, according to the faded welcome sign. It had one main street, a gas station, a diner that looked like it hadn't updated its menu since 1985, and a library that was only open 3 days a week. Today, thankfully, was one of those days. Willa and Thornton pulled into the library parking lot just after 3 in the afternoon. The building was small, tan brick with a mural of desert flowers painted on one side by what was probably a local artist. They sat in the car for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled, neither of them quite ready to take the next step. "Once we make these calls," Thornton said quietly, "there's no going back." "I know. People will find out. Our names will be in the news. Our lives will change." "I know," Willa repeated. "But they're already changed. The moment we pulled that panel off the wall, everything changed." Thornton nodded. He reached over and squeezed her hand. Then they got out of the car, Thornton carrying the metal box carefully, and walked into the Copper Ridge Public Library. The librarian was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a kind smile. Her name tag read Angela. She looked up from her desk as they entered. "Can I help you folks?" "We need to use a computer," Willa said, "and maybe make some phone calls. It's important." Angela gestured to a row of 3 outdated desktop computers along the wall. "Computers are free for an hour. Phones over there, local calls only though." "That's fine," Thornton said. "We have a cell phone for long distance. We just need somewhere quiet to make some calls." "Use the study room," Angela offered, pointing to a small glass-walled room in the corner. "Nobody's in there today." They thanked her and set up in the study room. Willa took out her phone, which finally had signal again. Thornton opened the metal box and spread the documents across the table. They looked at each other, took deep breaths, and began. First, they needed a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but someone who specialized in whistleblower cases, someone who understood federal law, someone they could trust. Willa started searching online while Thornton read through Earl's letter again, looking for any detail they might have missed. "Here," Willa said after 20 minutes of searching. "Margaret Chen. She's in Phoenix, specializes in whistleblower protection and federal cases. She's won some big cases against corporations and government agencies." She paused. "She's also expensive." "Call her anyway," Thornton said. "We'll figure out the money part later." Willa dialed. The phone rang 4 times before a receptionist answered. "Chen and Associates. How may I direct your call?" "I need to speak with Margaret Chen," Willa said, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's urgent. It's about a federal crime." There was a pause. "Miss Chen is in a meeting. I can take a message." "Tell her," Willa said, choosing her words carefully, "that we have evidence of a $300 million theft from a workers' pension fund in 1978. Tell her we have documentation, ledgers, and names. And tell her we're prepared to turn everything over to federal authorities, but we need legal protection first." Another pause, longer this time. "Please hold." Thornton watched his wife's face as she waited. She looked tired. They both were. They hadn't slept properly in 2 days, hadn't eaten a real meal. They were running on adrenaline and stubborn determination. But her eyes were clear, focused. She was in teacher mode, the mode where she had to get something important done and nothing was going to stop her. "This is Margaret Chen." The voice that came through the phone was sharp, professional, no nonsense. "You said $300 million. "Yes, ma'am," Willa replied. "My husband and I found it hidden in an abandoned motel, along with evidence that it was stolen from casino workers in Nevada in 1978. We have names. We have ledgers. We have everything." "Where are you right now?" "Copper Ridge, Arizona, small-town library." "Don't move. Don't talk to anyone else. Don't post anything online. I'm getting in my car right now. I'll be there in 2 hours." Margaret paused. "What are your names?" "Willa and Thornton Garrett." "Okay. Willa and Thornton Garrett. I'm going to ask you something very important. Have you taken any of this money for yourselves?" "No, ma'am. Not a single dollar." "Do you plan to?" "No, ma'am. We want it to go back to the families it was stolen from." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Margaret Chen said something Willa would remember for the rest of her life. "Then you might be the most honest people I've ever met. Sit tight. I'm on my way." The line went dead. Willa set the phone down and looked at Thornton. "She's coming." "Good," he said. "That's good." They spent the next 2 hours in that study room going through every document again. Thornton made detailed notes. Willa organized the photographs chronologically. They were building a timeline, a narrative that investigators could follow. It was important to be thorough. They couldn't afford mistakes. Angela, the librarian, brought them coffee and some crackers from the staff break room. She didn't ask questions, but Willa could see the curiosity in her eyes. 2 elderly people covered in dust, surrounded by old documents, making hushed phone calls. They probably looked like conspiracy theorists or treasure hunters, if she only knew. Margaret Chen arrived exactly 2 hours and 7 minutes after their phone call. She was a small woman, maybe 5'2", with silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wore a grey suit that looked expensive and carried a leather briefcase that had seen some miles. Her eyes were the sharpest thing about her, dark and assessing, taking in everything with a glance. "Mr. and Mrs. Garrett," she said, extending her hand. "Show me what you've got." They showed her everything, every document, every photograph, every ledger entry, Earl's letter, the newspaper clipping, the inventory they had made of the cash. Margaret said nothing as she reviewed it all, just nodded occasionally, made notes in a small leather notebook, asked clarifying questions. After an hour, she sat back and let out a low whistle. "This is real." "Yes, ma'am," Thornton said. "You understand what you've stumbled into? This isn't just theft. This is organized crime, racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy. And the people involved, if they're still alive, they have money and power and connections. We understand, Willa said. And you still want to turn it all over? No finder's fee? No reward? We want it to go to the victims, Willa said firmly. The people who lost their pensions, their families. That's where it belongs. Margaret studied them for a long moment. Then she smiled, a real smile that transformed her sharp features. Okay, here's how this is going to work. I'm going to make some calls. I have contacts at the FBI, people I trust. We're going to set up a meeting on neutral ground, somewhere public, with witnesses. You're going to show them everything you showed me. I'll be there to protect your legal interests. Are we in trouble? Willa asked. Could they arrest us? Not if we do this right, Margaret said. You haven't committed any crimes. You found evidence of a crime and you're reporting it. That makes you witnesses, not suspects. But yes, there will be questions, lots of questions, and your lives are going to get complicated for a while. How complicated? Thornton asked. Margaret's expression turned serious. You found $300 million that very dangerous people probably still think is safely hidden. When this goes public, and it will go public, those people are going to be very unhappy. You'll need protection, probably for months, maybe longer. Willa felt her stomach drop. We have a granddaughter's graduation to get to, in California. We're already late. Call her, Margaret said gently. Explain that something came up. Don't give details. Just say you'll be there as soon as you can. She paused. I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you signed up for, but you did the right thing by calling me. Now we're going to see it through properly. That night, they stayed at a cheap motel in Copper Ridge. Not abandoned this time, but barely a step up. Margaret got them separate rooms and stationed herself between them. She had already made her calls. FBI agents were driving down from Phoenix. They would meet tomorrow morning at the library, public location, witnesses, everything by the book. Willa sat on the edge of the scratchy motel bed and called Emily. Her granddaughter answered on the second ring. Grandma, where are you? The graduation is tomorrow. I know, sweetheart. I know, and I'm so sorry, but Grandpa and I got caught in a situation. We're okay, but we can't make it tomorrow. There was silence on the other end, then quietly, You promised. Those two words broke Willa's heart. I know I did, and I would give anything to be there. But something happened, something important, and we have to deal with it first. What happened? Are you sick? Is Grandpa okay? We're both fine. We're healthy. I can't explain right now, but I promise, the moment we can, we'll come see you. We'll take you out for a special dinner, just the three of us. I promise, Emily. You already broke one promise. Willa closed her eyes. Emily was right. They had broken their promise, and no amount of explaining would make that okay. I love you, she said. I'm so proud of you. You worked so hard for this degree. You're going to do amazing things. I love you too, Grandma, Emily said, but her voice was small, hurt. I have to go. Guests are arriving. The line went dead. Willa sat there holding the phone, tears streaming down her face. Thornton sat beside her and pulled her close. They stayed like that for a long time, crying together, mourning not just the missed graduation, but all the complications they knew were coming. We're doing the right thing, Thornton said eventually, even when it hurts. I know, Willa whispered, but that doesn't make it easier. They barely slept. Willa kept thinking about Emily's hurt voice. Thornton kept thinking about the families in Earl's ledger, the ones who had lost everything. They were both thinking about the choice they had made and the weight of carrying it through. What happens next will turn their sacrifice into something neither of them expected, reveal a truth that had been buried for nearly half a century, and remind us why sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most powerful changes. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Morning came too quickly. Margaret knocked on their door at 7. "Agents are here. You ready?" They weren't. But they got up anyway. They gathered the metal box, their notes, Willa's phone with all the photographs. They looked at each other in the motel room mirror. Two old people about to walk into something neither of them fully understood. But they were walking in together. That was something. The library didn't open until 9, but Angela the librarian had agreed to open early for this meeting. She had been told it was important legal business, nothing more. She let them in, turned on the lights, then discreetly disappeared into the back office. 3 FBI agents were waiting in the study room, 2 men and a woman, all wearing dark suits, all carrying badges and guns and expressions that gave nothing away. The lead agent was a man in his 50s named Frank Torres. He had grey at his temples and eyes that had seen too much. "Mr. and Mrs. Garrett," he said, "I'm Special Agent Torres. This is Agent Martinez and Agent Hu. Miss Chen has briefed us on your situation. We'd like to hear it directly from you." They told the story, start to finish. The storm, the abandoned motel, the strange wall, the discovery. They showed everything. Torres and his team took notes, asked questions, examined documents. They were thorough, professional, and gave away nothing about what they were thinking. After 2 hours, Torres sat back and looked at them. "You expect me to believe you found $300 million and didn't take any of it?" "Yes, sir," Thornton said simply. "Why not?" "Because it's not ours," Willa said. "It was stolen from people who worked their whole lives, people who deserved better. How could we take money that belongs to them?" "Most people would rationalize it," Torres said. "Tell themselves the victims are probably dead anyway, or that finders keepers, or that they deserve a reward for finding it." "We're not most people," Willa said quietly. Torres studied them for a long moment. Then he smiled, just slightly. "No, I don't think you are." He turned to his team. "I want forensics on that motel today. Full sweep of room 6 and the surrounding area. Coordinate with local PD, but keep this quiet. I don't want media sniffing around until we know what we're dealing with." He looked back at Willa and Thornton. "You two are going to need to come with us to Phoenix. We need full statements, official documentation, the whole 9 yards. Ms. Chen will accompany you. You're not under arrest. You're not suspects. But this is going to take time." "How much time?" Willa asked. "Days at minimum. Possibly weeks depending on what forensics finds and what the evidence leads to." Thornton pulled out his phone and looked at his calendar. Emily's graduation was happening right now. Hundreds of miles away, their granddaughter was walking across a stage, and they weren't there. He showed Willa the time. She nodded, fresh tears in her eyes. "We understand," Thornton said. "We'll cooperate fully." The next 3 days were a blur. They gave statements. They answered questions. They repeated their story to different agents, different investigators, different attorneys. The FBI confirmed everything. The money was real. The documents were authentic. The case was legitimate. Forensics swept the Desert Palms Motel and found exactly what Willa and Thornton had described. $310,200,000 in cash. The serial numbers matched records from the 1970s. The money was old, untraceable, and had definitely been hidden for decades. The FBI also found something else. Skeletal remains buried in the desert about 200 yards from the motel. Dental records would later confirm it was Earl Whitmore. He had been shot twice in the back of the head, execution style. He had been dead since approximately March of 1979, just weeks after he wrote his letter. The case exploded. Federal prosecutors got involved. Cold case detectives pulled old files. The original investigation into the Silver Mesa casino pension theft was reopened. And at the center of it all were Willa and Thornton Garrett, 2 elderly people who just wanted to get to their granddaughter's graduation, but instead found themselves as key witnesses in one of the largest financial crime cases in Arizona history. Margaret Chen proved to be worth every penny she would eventually cost them. She negotiated immunity deals, protected their identities in early press releases, and made sure they were treated as the heroes they were, not as suspects. But even with her help, the process was exhausting. They stayed in a safe house in Phoenix, an FBI protection detail outside 24/7. They couldn't contact family directly, couldn't post on social media, couldn't tell anyone where they were or what they were doing. For two people who had lived quiet, simple lives, it was surreal and terrifying. On the fourth night, Thornton couldn't sleep. He got up and found Willa sitting at the kitchen table of the safe house, going through papers Margaret had given them. Legal documents, witness protection information, options and consequences laid out in neat columns. "Having second thoughts?" he asked. "Every hour," she admitted. "We could have just walked away, left the wall sealed, driven to Emily's graduation, lived our normal lives. But we didn't." "No," she said. "We didn't." She looked up at him. "Do you remember when we first got married? We were so broke. You were working at the post office making minimum wage. I was student teaching for free. We had that apartment with the broken heater. And we ate ramen noodles 4 nights a week." Thornton smiled at the memory. "You remember what you said to me that winter when we couldn't afford Christmas presents?" Thornton thought. "I said we might not have much, but we have each other, and we have our integrity. As long as we have those, we're rich. You still believe that?" He looked at her tired face, at the grey in her hair, at the hands that had graded thousands of papers and changed countless diapers and held him through every storm life had thrown at them. "Yeah," he said, "I do. We've never been rich in money, but we've always been rich in the things that matter." Willa reached across the table and took his hand. "Then we made the right choice. Even though it cost us Emily's graduation?" "Even though," Willa said firmly. "Because what kind of example would we be setting if we kept that money? What would we be teaching our grandchildren? That it's okay to profit from other people's suffering as long as you don't get caught." "When you put it like that," Thornton said. "There is no other way to put it," Willa replied. "This money was stolen from families like ours, people who worked hard their whole lives and had it all taken away by greedy men in suits. If we took even $1, we'd be no better than the men who stole it in the first place." Margaret knocked on the doorframe. She had been staying in the safe house with them, working around the clock on their case. "Sorry to interrupt, but I have news." They looked up. "Good news or bad news?" Willa asked. "Depends on your perspective," Margaret said, sitting down with them. "The FBI has traced the organization that stole the money. Most of the original players are dead, but 3 of them are still alive, all in their 80s and 90s now, living comfortable retirements in Florida, Nevada, and California." "They're going to be arrested?" Thornton asked. "Warrants are being prepared now. All 3 will be charged with racketeering, theft, money laundering, and accessory to murder for Earl Whitmore's death." Margaret paused. "There's more. We found the victims." Willa's heart jumped. "The pension fund families? Most of them. 37 families lost money in the original theft. We've located 29 of them. Some of the original workers are still alive. Most have children and grandchildren. All of them have been struggling for decades because of what was taken." "Are they going to get the money back?" Willa asked. "That's where it gets complicated," Margaret said. "The money is evidence in a federal case. It'll be tied up in courts for months, maybe years, but federal law allows for victim restitution once the case is resolved. Every family will be compensated based on what was stolen from them originally, plus interest." "How much?" Thornton asked. Margaret pulled out a calculator. "The original theft was $37 million from the pension fund, plus another $273 million from other sources we're still tracking. If it's divided among the 29 families we've located, plus accounting for inflation and lost investment returns over 47 years, we're looking at approximately $4 to $5 million per family." Willa's hand flew to her mouth. That could change their lives. It will change their lives, Margaret corrected. Grandkids will go to college, mortgages will be paid off, retirements will be secured, medical bills will be cleared, all because you two refused to keep money that wasn't yours. They sat in silence, processing that. Their decision, their sacrifice, was going to ripple out and touch dozens of families they had never met. People who had been suffering for nearly 5 decades were finally going to get justice, because 2 elderly people got caught in a sandstorm and had the integrity to do the right thing. "There's something else," Margaret said. "Federal law provides for a finder's fee in cases like this. 10% is standard. That would be $31 million. Willer and Thornton looked at each other. $31 million. They could pay off every debt, help all their children, see Emily whenever they wanted, never worry about money again, live like royalty for the rest of their lives. "We don't want it," Willer said. "Are you sure? You've earned it. Legally, ethically, it's yours if you want it." "We're sure," Thornton said. "Put it in a fund for the families, scholarships for their kids and grandkids, something that keeps helping long after we're gone." Margaret stared at them. "You're serious?" "Completely serious," Willer said. "This was never about us getting rich. It was about doing what's right." Margaret shook her head slowly, something like wonder in her eyes. "I've been a lawyer for 32 years. I've seen people fight over $5 inheritance disputes. I've watched families destroy each other over money. And here you are, turning away $31 million because you think it's the right thing to do." "It is the right thing to do," Thornton said simply. "Yes," Margaret agreed, "it is, and that makes you extraordinary." 2 weeks after they first broke through the wall in room 6, Willer and Thornton were finally allowed to leave the safe house. The initial arrests had been made. The case was moving forward. Their testimony had been recorded and documented. They were still protected witnesses, still under some security, but they could go home. Except they didn't go home. Not right away. First, they drove to California. They showed up at Emily's apartment unannounced, knocked on the door, and when she opened it, they wrapped her in the biggest hug they had ever given. "Grandma, Grandpa, what are you doing here?" "Keeping a promise," Willa said. "Better late than never." They took Emily out for that special dinner. They couldn't tell her everything, not yet. The case was still under seal, details confidential, but they told her enough, that they had found something important, that they had done the right thing even though it was hard, that they had missed her graduation not because they didn't care, but because they cared so much about doing what was right that they couldn't compromise. Emily cried. They all cried. And then Emily said something that made everything worth it. "I was angry at first, but now I'm just proud. Proud that you're my grandparents. Proud that when you had to choose between easy and right, you chose right." That night, as they drove back to their motel, Thornton reached over and took Willa's hand. "No regrets?" "Not a single one," Willa said. "You?" "Not one." They had given away $310 million. They had turned away a $31 million finder's fee. They had sacrificed comfort, security, and the easy life they could have had, and they would do it all again in a heartbeat. Because some things matter more than money. Things like integrity, like justice, like being able to look your grandchildren in the eye and know you showed them what it really means to do the right thing. The road ahead was still uncertain. There would be trials, there would be testimony, there would be media attention they didn't want and complications they couldn't predict. But they would face it all together, the way they had faced everything for 51 years, hand in hand, heart to heart. 2 ordinary people who had stumbled into an extraordinary situation and proven that heroism doesn't always look like strength or youth. Sometimes it looks like an elderly couple in a dusty motel room choosing the harder right over the easier wrong. And that choice, That simple act of integrity was about to change more lives than they could possibly imagine. 3 months felt like 3 years. The legal process moved with the speed of continental drift, every step requiring documentation, verification, testimony, and endless waiting. Willer and Thornton had returned to their small apartment in Indiana, but their lives were anything but normal. Federal marshals checked in weekly. Margaret Chen called every few days with updates, and the media, once they caught wind of the story, circled like vultures. The first article appeared in the Arizona Republic. Elderly couple discovers massive cache of stolen funds, returns everything. It was a small piece, buried on page 7. But within days, it had been picked up by the Associated Press, then Sun, then every major news outlet in the country. Suddenly, Willer and Thornton Garrett were famous. Their phone rang constantly. Reporters camped outside their apartment building. Neighbors they hadn't spoken to in years suddenly wanted to chat. Their mailbox overflowed with letters from strangers, some supportive, some accusatory, some just bizarre. One man wrote a 7-page letter explaining how he was the rightful owner of the money because his great-uncle had once worked at a casino in 1962. Another woman claimed God had told her she deserved half for prayer support. But mixed in with the crazy were letters that made them weep. Letters from people whose lives had been destroyed by financial crimes. Letters from working families who understood what it meant to have everything stolen. Letters from children and grandchildren of the original pension fund victims, thanking them for caring when no one else had. One letter came from a woman named Patricia Flores in Nevada. Willer read it aloud to Thornton one evening as they sat in their living room, curtains drawn against the reporters outside. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Garrett, you don't know me, but my father was Raymond Flores. He worked as a dealer at the Silver Mesa Casino for 23 years. He was one of the workers who lost everything when the pension fund was stolen in 1978. He died in 2003, believing he had failed our family. He died thinking he should have worked harder, saved more, been smarter with money. He never knew it wasn't his fault. He never knew someone had stolen his future. You gave my father something, even though he's gone. You gave him vindication. You proved he didn't fail us. Someone stole from him. And now, finally, after all these years, there will be justice. I can't thank you enough for that. My father died with guilt he should never have carried. You lifted that burden, even if he's not here to feel it. With eternal gratitude, Patricia Flores." Willer's hands shook as she set the letter down. Thornton wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Outside, a reporter was trying to interview their neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, who was loudly telling him to get off her property or she'd call the police. "We did the right thing," Thornton said finally, though it sounded like he was trying to convince himself. "I know," Willer replied, "but God, it's hard." It was hard. Harder than either of them had anticipated. The attention was overwhelming. They couldn't go to the grocery store without being recognized, couldn't eat at their favorite diner without someone wanting to shake their hands or take photos or tell them what they should have done with the money. Everyone had opinions, everyone had advice, and almost everyone thought they were either saints or idiots with very little middle ground. Their children had mixed reactions. Sophia, their oldest, was proud but worried about their safety. Marcus thought they should have kept at least some of the money to help the family. Jamie, the youngest, couldn't stop crying every time they talked about it. "You could have been set for life," she kept saying. "You deserved that money after everything you've been through." But it was Emily, their granddaughter, who understood. She visited them one weekend, pushing through the reporters with a determination that made Willer laugh despite everything. Emily sat with them in their small living room, now cluttered with unopened mail and legal documents, and asked the question everyone wanted to know. "Grandma, Grandpa, why did you really give it all away? And don't say because it was the right thing to do. I want to know the real reason, what you felt in that moment when you decided." Willa thought about it for a long time. "Do you remember when you were 8 and you found that wallet in the park?" Emily nodded. "It had $200 in it. And what did you do?" "I turned it in to the police." "Why?" "Because it wasn't mine. Because someone was probably looking for it. Because you taught me that's what good people do." Willa smiled. "Exactly. We could have kept that money, Emily. We could have rationalized it 100 different ways. We could have told ourselves we deserved it, that we needed it, that no one would ever know. But every time we looked in the mirror, we would have known. Every time we looked at you, we would have known we were hypocrites. How could we have taught you to return a $200 wallet and then kept $300 million that belonged to someone else?" "But you sacrificed so much," Emily said. "You could have helped Mom, helped Uncle Marcus, helped all of us." "And instead, we showed you something more valuable than money," Thornton said. "We showed you that integrity isn't something you practice when it's convenient. It's something you hold on to when it costs you everything." Emily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My roommate thinks you're insane. But I told her you're the sanest people I know, because you know what actually matters." That conversation sustained them through the hard months that followed. Because there were a lot of hard months, the federal case moved forward slowly. The 3 surviving criminals, all elderly men living comfortable retirements, were arrested. Their lawyers fought every charge. The media coverage intensified, and Willa and Thornton found themselves at the center of a legal and media circus they had never wanted. Margaret Chen remained their constant advocate. She shielded them from the worst of it, declined interview requests on their behalf, and kept them focused on what mattered. "The trial is in 4 months, she told them in June. "After that, the restitution process begins. The families will finally get their money. Just hold on a little longer." But holding on was exhausting. Thornton's health started to decline. The stress triggered his heart condition, and he ended up in the hospital twice. Willa developed insomnia, sometimes going days with only a few hours of sleep. They were 72 and 74 years old. They should have been enjoying retirement, visiting grandchildren, taking quiet walks. Instead, they were living through something that felt like a war. Then, in August, something shifted. The FBI finished tracing all the money. They had found not just the $310 million in the motel, but additional assets the criminals had hidden. Offshore accounts, property holdings, investments made with stolen money. The total recovered was close to $400 million. And the victims' list grew. The original investigation had identified 29 families affected by the Silver Mesa casino pension theft. But as federal investigators dug deeper, they found dozens more. Workers from other casinos, employees of businesses the criminals had looted, families who had lost everything and never knew why. By the time the investigation concluded, 73 families had been identified as victims. Margaret called them with the news. "The prosecutor is offering the defendants a deal: plead guilty to all charges, full restitution to victims, in exchange for reduced sentences given their ages. If they take it, this could be over in weeks instead of years." "Will they take it?" Willa asked. "They'd be fools not to. The evidence is overwhelming. Your discovery gave us everything we needed. Earl Whitmore's records, the ledgers, the documentation, it's airtight. They'll die in prison either way, but this way it'll be in minimum security instead of maximum." 2 weeks later, all 3 defendants accepted the plea deal. They would each serve 15 to 20 years in federal prison, likely the rest of their natural lives, and they would forfeit every asset, every penny, everything they had built on stolen money. It would all go to restitution. The day the plea deal was announced, Willa and Thornton sat in their living room watching the news coverage. They saw the criminals being led out of court, old men in expensive suits who had lived 50 years on other people's suffering. They saw the prosecutors celebrating. They saw Margaret Chen giving a statement praising the Garretts' integrity and courage. And they saw something else. Outside the courthouse, a group of people held signs. Not protesters, but supporters. Signs that read, "Thank you, Garretts," and "Integrity matters," and "Heroes look like grandparents." Some of the people holding those signs were crying. "Those are the families," Thornton said quietly. "The victims." Willa couldn't speak. She just nodded, tears streaming down her face. The next day, Margaret called with an unexpected request. "Some of the victim families want to meet you. Not all of them, just a few. They want to thank you in person. Would you be comfortable with that?" Willa looked at Thornton. He nodded. "Yes," she said. "We'd like that." The meeting was arranged for the following Saturday at a community center in Phoenix. Margaret said to expect maybe 10 or 12 people. Instead, over 40 showed up. 3 generations of families whose lives had been shattered by the original theft. Elderly workers who had lost their pensions, middle-aged children who had grown up poor because of it, young adults who had never had the opportunities they should have had. Willa and Thornton walked into that community center holding hands, both of them terrified. They didn't know what to expect: gratitude, anger, demands. But what they found was something else entirely. They found healing. The first person to approach them was an elderly man, probably 80 years old, using a walker. His name was Victor Martinez. "I worked at Silver Mesa for 31 years, he said, voice shaking. "I was 53 when they stole my pension. I had to keep working until I was 78. I cleaned offices at night because it was the only job I could get. My wife died working as a cashier at 69 because we couldn't afford to retire. We never bought a house, never took a vacation, never had any of the things we worked our whole lives for." He paused, tears running down his weathered face. "I've been angry for 47 years, angry at myself for trusting them, angry at the world for letting it happen, angry at God for not fixing it. But today, meeting you two, I'm not angry anymore, because you proved that good people still exist. You proved that someone cares about folks like us. You gave me back something more valuable than money. You gave me back faith." He hugged Willa, then Thornton, holding on tight like they were family. Willa sobbed into his shoulder. Around them, other people were crying too. A middle-aged woman named Carmen approached next. "My father died 10 years ago. He was one of the workers who lost his pension. It destroyed him. He drank himself to death because he thought he had failed us. I've carried so much anger, so much resentment. But you two, you proved my father didn't fail. He was robbed. There's a difference. And knowing that, finally understanding that it wasn't his fault, it's like a weight lifting off my whole family." The stories kept coming, one after another. People who had suffered in silence for decades. People who had blamed themselves. People who had given up hope of ever seeing justice. And now, because 2 elderly people had found a fortune and refused to keep it, they were finally getting answers. Finally getting vindication. Finally getting their lives back. A young woman, maybe 25, approached shyly. "My name is Sofia Reyes. My grandfather was Rodrigo Reyes. He worked in the cage at Silver Mesa. He died before I was born, but my grandmother told me stories. How he was so proud of his work, how he saved every penny for retirement, how it was all stolen and he never recovered. My grandmother raised me alone, working 2 jobs because they couldn't afford anything after the theft." She paused. "Because of what you did, my grandmother is going to get restitution. For the first time in her life, she won't have to worry about money. She's 86 years old, and she's going to finally feel secure. You gave her that. You gave all of us that." Thornton could barely stand. His heart felt too full, too heavy. He looked at these people, 3 generations marked by one crime, and understood for the first time the true weight of what he and Willa had found. It wasn't just money, it was stolen futures, stolen dreams, stolen peace of mind. And by returning it, they hadn't just given back cash, they had given back dignity. The meeting lasted 3 hours. People shared photos of lost loved ones, shared stories of hardship and resilience, shared tears and laughter and hope. And through it all, Willa and Thornton sat at the center, holding hands, listening, bearing witness to pain they couldn't fix but could at least acknowledge. As people were leaving, Victor Martinez approached them one more time. He handed Willa a photograph. It showed a young man in a dealer's uniform, smiling, proud. "That's me in 1972, Victor said. "I want you to have it, so you remember that we weren't just numbers on a ledger, we were people, we had dreams, and you honored those dreams when you gave that money back." Willa held the photograph carefully. "We'll treasure this," she promised. "No," Victor said gently. "You already treasured us. That's why we're here." The drive back to their hotel was quiet. Neither Willa nor Thornton could find words big enough for what they had just experienced. They had known intellectually that returning the money was right. But now they felt it, bone deep, soul deep. They had changed lives, real lives. People who had been suffering for nearly half a century were finally getting justice because 2 people got caught in a sandstorm and made a choice. That night, Margaret Chen joined them for dinner at a small Mexican restaurant where they wouldn't be recognized. She had news. The restitution process is moving forward. The court has approved the distribution plan. Each of the 73 families will receive between $3 and $7 million, depending on how much was originally stolen from them. "When?" Willa asked. "Disbursements begin next month. Some families will get checks. Some will get structured settlements, but everyone will get what they're owed, plus interest, plus compensation for suffering." Margaret paused. "There's something else. The court has formally recognized your finder's fee, $31 million. It's yours if you want it." Willa and Thornton looked at each other. They had talked about this. They had made their decision months ago. But after meeting the families, after seeing the faces behind the numbers, that decision felt even more certain. "We want it to go to a scholarship fund," Willa said, "for the descendants of the victims, so their grandchildren and great-grandchildren can go to college, so something good continues long after we're gone." Margaret smiled. "I know. I already drew up the paperwork. I was just checking to make sure you hadn't changed your minds." "Not a chance," Thornton said. The scholarship fund was established in October. It was called the Earl Whitmore Memorial Education Fund, honoring the man who had tried to make things right, even though it cost him his life. The fund would provide full scholarships to any descendant of the 73 victim families who wanted to pursue higher education. Between the $31 million in finder's fees and additional donations that started pouring in once the story went public, the fund had over $40 million. It would change hundreds of lives, maybe thousands over time. Kids who never thought they could afford college would now have that chance. And it was all because Willa and Thornton Garrett chose integrity over wealth. The media attention reached a fever pitch after the scholarship fund was announced. Every news outlet wanted an interview. Every talk show wanted them as guests. Publishers offered book deals. Hollywood called about movie rights. And through it all, Willa and Thornton said no. They declined almost every request. They didn't want fame. They didn't want to profit from their decision. They just wanted to go back to their normal lives. But they agreed to one interview. A local news station in Indiana, the same station Thornton used to watch every morning before work. A young reporter named Jessica Kim came to their apartment with one camera operator and no fanfare. She sat at their kitchen table, the same table where they ate cereal most mornings, and asked simple questions. "Why did you give it all away?" Jessica asked. "Because it wasn't ours," Willa said simply. "We didn't earn it. Other people did. All we did was find it. and finding something that belongs to someone else doesn't make it yours. But you could have kept it. Legally, you might have had a claim to at least some of it. Thornton shook his head. Legal and right aren't always the same thing. We knew whose money it was. We knew who had been hurt by losing it. How could we keep it and look ourselves in the mirror? Do you regret it? Jessica asked. When you're paying bills or worrying about money, do you ever think about what could have been? Willa was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that would be quoted in newspapers and social media posts for months afterward. Money can buy a lot of things, but it can't buy the peace that comes from knowing you did the right thing. It can't buy the satisfaction of helping families who deserved justice, and it can't buy integrity. You either have that or you don't, and if you sell it for any price, you'll spend the rest of your life trying to buy it back. Thornton added, "We didn't find that money. That money found us, and it came with a responsibility. Some people might have seen it as a lucky windfall. We saw it as a test, and I hope we passed." The interview aired on a Tuesday evening. It went viral within hours. Clips were shared millions of times. Comment sections filled with people arguing, debating, sharing their own stories. Some people called Willa and Thornton naive. Some called them heroes. Some said they were fools for giving away a fortune. Some said they were exactly what the world needed. But what mattered most were the messages from the victim families. Patricia Flores, whose father had died believing he had failed, posted a video response. "Mr. and Mrs. Garrett, you gave my family something priceless. You gave us the truth. You gave us justice. You gave us peace. There is no dollar amount in the world worth that. Thank you for being the kind of people who still believe in doing right." My father is smiling somewhere, I know it. By November, the restitution payments were complete. Every family had received their money. Lives were changing in real time. Mortgages were being paid off, medical debts cleared, college funds established, retirements secured. People who had struggled for decades were finally breathing easy. Willa and Thornton received hundreds of thank you cards, photos of families in front of new homes, graduation announcements, wedding invitations, birth announcements. The ripples of their decision spread wider than they could have imagined. By giving away money that wasn't theirs to keep, they had helped rebuild dozens of families. But the strangest gift came in December. A check arrived in the mail from an anonymous donor, $20,000. The note with it read, "You took care of others. Now let someone take care of you. Pay off some bills. Take your granddaughter on that trip you couldn't afford. You've earned this." Willa cried when she opened it. They had been struggling, more than they admitted to anyone. Thornton's hospital bills from his heart episodes had piled up. Their car needed major repairs they couldn't afford. They were behind on credit card payments. The money would make a real difference. "Should we keep it?" Thornton asked. "It's a gift," Willa said. "Freely given, not stolen. Yes, we should keep it." They used some to pay bills, some to fix the car, and some to fly Emily out for Christmas. The whole family gathered at their small apartment, sitting on mismatched furniture and eating food from the discount grocery store. And it was perfect. Emily brought her roommate, the one who thought they were insane. The roommate, a business major named Jennifer, seemed nervous at first, but after dinner she pulled Willa aside. "I owe you an apology," she said. "I told Emily you were crazy to give away that money. But I've been watching what happened. I've seen the families you helped. I've read the stories, and I realized something. You're not crazy. You're just operating on a completely different value system than most people." "Different how?" Willa asked. "Most people, including me, see money as the goal, the thing that solves problems and brings happiness. But you see money as a tool, something that can be used for good or harm depending on who holds it. You gave it away because you understood it could do more good in other hands than in yours. That's not crazy, that's wisdom." Willa hugged the young woman. "Keep that in sight. Don't lose it when you get out into the business world. There's nothing wrong with making money, but don't ever let money make you. In January, almost a year after they had found the money, Willa and Thornton were invited back to Arizona. The State Historical Society had decided to preserve the Desert Palms Motel as a landmark. Room 6 was being turned into a small museum telling the story of Earl Whitmore, the stolen pension funds, and the integrity of the Garretts. They drove out together, past the same road where they had escaped the sandstorm. The motel looked different now, cleaned up, stabilized. A historical marker stood at the entrance. Tour buses were parked in the lot. People were walking around with cameras and audio guides. Inside Room 6, the walls had been restored but not modernized. The bed was still there, stripped down to the frame. The panel where they had found the money was covered in plexiglass so visitors could see but not touch. Photographs lined the walls telling the whole story. Earl Whitmore as a young man opening his motel, the criminals who used it for their operations, the newspaper clippings about the pension theft, and photos of Willa and Thornton, though they had requested their images be minimal. A plaque on the wall read, "In this room, August 2025, Willa and Thornton Garrett discovered $310 million in stolen money. They returned every penny to its rightful owners, demonstrating that integrity is priceless and that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary good. Their selfless action resulted in justice for 73 families and established educational opportunities for future generations. They stood in that room, hand in hand, and remembered that stormy night, remembered the fear and uncertainty, remembered finding the money and making the hardest decision of their lives, remembered everything that came after." "Any regrets?" Thornton asked, the same question he had asked a dozen times over the past year. "Not one," Willa said. "You?" "Not one." A young couple approached them, tourists from Minnesota. "Are you them?" the woman asked. "The Garretts?" Willa nodded. "We are." "Can I ask you something?" the woman said. "How did you know? How did you know giving it away was the right choice when keeping it would have been so much easier?" Willa thought about all the rehearsed answers she had given over the past year, all the media training Margaret had provided, all the proper responses. But standing here in Room 6, where it all began, she gave the only answer that mattered. "We didn't know," she said honestly. "We were scared. We were tempted. We thought about all the ways that money could help our family. But then we thought about all the families it had already hurt. And we realized we couldn't build our happiness on someone else's suffering. That's not complicated philosophy. That's just basic decency." The woman nodded, wiping tears from her eyes. "My grandfather was one of the workers, Victor Martinez. He talks about you every day, says you gave him back his dignity." Willa's hand flew to her mouth. "Victor is your grandfather?" "Yes, ma'am. And because of the restitution, he's finally able to afford the medical care he needs. Because of you, I get to have more time with him. You didn't just give back money. You gave back life." They hugged strangers in the doorway of Room 6, crying together, 3 generations connected by one choice made during a desert storm. As they left the motel that evening, the sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of orange and gold. Willa and Thornton stood in the parking lot, the same spot where their car had been buried in sand, and looked back at the building that had changed their lives. "We should get going," Thornton said. "Long drive back." But Willa wasn't ready to leave yet. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night, when we were scared and didn't know what was going to happen? I said we'd figure it out together." "And we did," Willa said. "We figured out that some things are worth more than money, that integrity can't be bought or sold, that doing right is its own reward even when it costs everything." "Are you trying to make me cry in a parking lot?" Thornton asked, voice thick with emotion. "Maybe," Willa smiled, "because I want you to know something. 51 years ago, I married you thinking I knew who you were. But this past year, I fell in love with you all over again, watching you stay true to your values even when it was hard, watching you put others first, watching you be the man I always knew you were but never had to prove. I'm proud to be your wife." Thornton pulled her close, and they stood there in the fading light, two elderly people who had found a fortune and given it away, and somehow ended up richer than they ever imagined possible. Not in their bank account, but in their hearts, in their character, in their legacy. They drove home slowly, taking back roads, stopping at small diners, enjoying the journey. When they finally arrived at their apartment building 3 days later, they found something unexpected. A banner hung across the entrance, "Welcome home, heroes." Their neighbors had organized a small party. Nothing fancy, just folding tables with homemade food and a cake from the grocery store bakery. But everyone was there. People from their building, former co-workers, members of the teachers' union Willa had belonged to, veterans from Thornton's old VFW post. Emily had flown in to surprise them. The mayor of their small town gave a brief speech. The local veterans organization presented Thornton with an honorary medal. The teachers' union gave Willa a Lifetime Achievement Award. And through it all, Willa and Thornton stood together, uncomfortable with the attention, grateful for the love, humbled by the recognition. But the moment that mattered most came at the end of the evening. The first scholarship recipient from the Earl Whitmore Memorial Education Fund approached them. Her name was Rosalinda Martinez, Victor's great-granddaughter. She was 18, starting college in the fall, planning to major in education. "I want to be a teacher like you, Mrs. Garrett," she said shyly. "I want to help kids the way you helped my family. And someday, I want to be the kind of person who does the right thing even when it's hard, like both of you." Willa hugged the young woman tight. "You already are that person. By choosing to learn, to grow, to give back, you're already living it." That night, after everyone had left and the apartment was quiet again, Willa and Thornton sat on their worn couch drinking tea. Their apartment was still small, their furniture still old, their bills still tight. Nothing about their material circumstances had changed. They were still living on Social Security and small pensions, still shopping at discount stores and clipping coupons. But everything had changed. They had discovered something more valuable than $310 million. They had discovered that who you are matters more than what you have. That integrity is the only currency that never loses value, that doing right creates ripples that spread farther than you can imagine. "Do you think we'll be remembered?" Thornton asked. "I don't know," Willa said. "Does it matter?" "I guess not. We'll be remembered by the people who matter, the families we helped, the students who get scholarships, Rosalinda and kids like her who learned something from our choice. That's enough." "More than enough," Thornton agreed. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of silence that comes from 51 years of marriage and shared values. Outside, life continued. People rushed to work, worried about bills, chased after money and things. But inside that small apartment, two elderly people had found something most people spend their entire lives searching for. They had found purpose. They had found meaning. They had found peace. Because at the end of the day, Willa and Thornton Garrett understood something profound. You can't take money with you when you go, but you can leave behind a legacy of integrity. You can leave behind lives you touched and people you helped and choices that inspired others to be better. That's the only wealth that truly matters. That's the only inheritance worth passing on. Anyone can find fortune if they're lucky enough, but it takes true character to give it away for the right reasons. Willa and Thornton reminded all of us that heroism doesn't always look like strength or youth or power. Sometimes it looks like two elderly people standing in a dusty motel room choosing the harder right over the easier wrong. Because integrity isn't about what you do when people are watching. It's about what you do when no one would ever know. It's about who you are when tested by temptation. It's about staying true to your values when the whole world tells you you're crazy. They had been tested, they had been tempted, and they had passed. Not perfectly, not easily, but completely. And in doing so, they proved that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary good. That small choices can have massive impacts, that giving away everything can make you richer than keeping it all. The story of Willa and Thornton Garrett spread far beyond Arizona, far beyond the 73 families they helped, far beyond the scholarship recipients who would benefit for generations. It became a reminder that in a world obsessed with accumulation, sometimes the most revolutionary act is letting go. That true wealth is measured not in what you have, but in what you give. That character is the only currency that matters, and that love, integrity, and justice are treasures worth more than all the money ever printed. They never became rich, never lived in luxury, never had the comfortable retirement they probably deserved. But every night they went to bed knowing they had done right, and every morning they woke up with no regrets. That's a kind of wealth most millionaires never achieve. That's a kind of peace money can never buy. That's a kind of legacy that echoes through generations. Because at the end of every great story, it's not about what we found. It's about what we decided to do with it. And Willa and Thornton Garrett decided to give it all away. To strangers they would never meet, for reasons the world couldn't quite understand. And in that choice, they became more than just two elderly people who found some money. They became proof that goodness still exists, that integrity still matters, that ordinary people can change the world if they're brave enough to stay true to who they are. The end. Up next, two more powerful stories of courage, integrity, and the choices that define us. Click to keep discovering with us, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe doing the right thing is always worth it, no matter the cost.